Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy little human being, you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this craziness, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the absolutely horrific murder of 4-year-old Samiah Downing. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new morbid makeup video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want. They're both BRATTERSTEIN, but no pressure. So now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can get into this video. And I'm going to start this video right off the bat. You know I don't usually do this, but I am going to give a trigger warning because this is a case involving a child. And this is a case that deals heavily with child abuse leading up to this poor little baby's murder. And I know that that's not for everyone, so if this one is going to be too tough for you, I get it, trust me. See you next Monday. You can choose to not watch. You guys know I don't even really like to do kids' cases, but this case felt very important to do once I started learning about it. It felt important to talk about because this little girl went through absolute hell in her short time on this planet, particularly in 1 year in specific. And some people had no idea she was going through it, and some people had ideas and didn't do anything about it. And that's just so messed up, and I think it's important to talk about things you could watch for one, to maybe stop something like this from happening if you can. And it also hit home for me in particular because of the location. This happened in Adelanto, California, which is part of the high desert, which is incidentally where I spent all of my formative years, was in the high desert, not Adelanto specifically, but I did live in Adelanto for a time. I went to an elementary school in Adelanto. So when I was reading about it, it felt personal in that regard. And so I kept looking into it and kept reading and listening to everything I could find on the case. And now that I have all this information, I wanted to bring it to you today. With that said, today I'm going to tell you the entire story. And while I do, I'm going to be putting on a full face of makeup, hence the makeup and morbid makeup. And if that's not really your thing, no problem. That's cool. Thanks for hanging out this long. I hope you find a channel you like more. But if you're on the fence, you're not sure how you feel, maybe stick around. I think you could be surprised by how much you like me. Now, with all of that said, I think it's time we just get into this absolutely horrible case. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the horrific and tragic murder of 4-year-old Samiah Downing. Samiah Christine Cornell Downing was born February 14th, 2008 on Valentine's Day to teenage parents Ronald and Monica, and was given the middle name Christine after her grandmother who had passed away a few years before she was born. Samiah was known as just being a wonderful girl, a happy girl, a loving child. She loved Dora the Explorer and going to Chuck E. Cheese. Samiah and her grandpa Chris would go on these little grandpa-granddaughter dates to Chuck E. Cheese because she loved it so much. And she was just a super happy and playful kid, not reserved at all. She would just run around the arcade area and climb all over things and crawl through the tunnels and just had a ton of energy and love for her little life. And man, she was adorable, painfully cute with these big round cheeks and big round brown eyes. And I mean, just look at her. Like, just look at her. Oh my God. So, the relationship between Samiah's parents, Ronald and Monica, didn't last very long. They were very young. I don't know the nature of their relationship when they first got together and how solid they were in the first place. But by the time Samiah was 2 years old, Ronald had already dipped out. He had left and he had found himself a new girlfriend in another teenage girl named Bianca Stanch. And once he started dating Bianca, he didn't really see Samiah that much anymore. He had just kind of, went about his new life and left that behind. And Samiah lived full-time with her mother, her new baby brother, because Monica had had another child, a son, and family who was helping her take care of the kids because she was a new single young mother trying to navigate life on her own. She was getting jobs and she was working as much as she could, so she needed the help, especially since Samaya's father had effectively just been like, good luck, but I'm gonna go do something else. I know I helped make this kid, like half this kid, but I don't want to have part in it. And it's not like Ronald didn't like kids in general. It just seemed like he didn't want to be involved with Samaya, because by February of 2011, Ronald and Bianca were announcing that they were now pregnant with their first child. And I mean, that's cool, except for the fact that you don't even take care of the child you have now. This was just like sort of how Ronald was. Ronald and Bianca were just like really young. Not to say Monica wasn't young, because she was, and she was taking care of her kids. But you know, some people are different. They were just this young ass couple. They like to drink. They like to party. They like to smoke weed. I'd like to think that Bianca wasn't doing these things while she was pregnant with the couple's child. But given how this case goes, I don't really have much faith in these two human beings. And I don't know if Ronald was not a great person independently, or if being with Bianca, they just brought out the worst in each other. But even his own family wasn't really supportive of the relationship, and his own mother called him a, quote, deadbeat, just like his father. That didn't really stop them though, because ain't nobody want to see them together, but it don't matter, no, because I got you, babe. And in October of 2011, their first baby came into the world, and they were welcoming a baby girl, a little sister for Samaya. It was shortly after the birth of the couple's own daughter that Ronald and Bianca sort of started to get their shit together a little bit. They were still partying and drinking and smoking and all that shit, but they also got their own apartment, and they were starting to just try to be more stable, have a place to like raise their new tiny family. And it was at this time that Monica, Samaya's mother, started to work full-time as well. And in addition to that, wanted her daughter to have a relationship with her father, if at all possible. So she started letting Samaya go over and spend time with Ronald and Bianca and her new baby sister during the times that Monica was busy at work or, you know, doing anything else. She was just giving him like visitation. So she'd have an opportunity to get to know her dad, get to know her new baby sister and her stepmom, though Bianca and Ronald never officially did get married. Now, I'm not entirely sure why, but in early 2012, Samaya started staying with Ronald and Bianca full-time. And there are different reportings on how this came to be. In some sources, it says that that Samaya went over for a visit and that he just like never gave her back. But there's also, I listened to an interview with one of the detectives on the case, and he said that initially Samaya was permitted to live with Ronald because at the time Ronald had a house or a place to live, an apartment, and that he had a full-time job. Like he was able to financially take care of her and, more importantly, wanted to take care of his daughter. So that's how she ended up being in his possession, and that eventually he just sort of stopped letting her see her extended family, that the couple started to move around a lot, making them difficult to find. And I'm not sure why, as soon as he started doing this, the cops weren't called. Hindsight's 2020, you know, but for whatever reason they weren't. And now Samaya was in the care of Bianca and Ronald instead of her mother, Monica, and her mother's family. And Ronald and Bianca enrolled her in preschool. And from the outside, to some people at least, it seemed like things were actually going well and things were working. But eventually, Ronald started completely isolating her, Ronald and Bianca, who's to say who was the leader in this, started to completely isolate Samaya from her other family, and they just didn't know where she was or how she was, and no one spoke to her for a while. And that's really sad, in addition to a lot of things, because Samaya was very close with both her mother and her grandfather, and they just hadn't heard from her, hadn't seen her, didn't know where she was or what she was up to and what was going on with Ronald. Samaya's Aunt Lori said that the last time she saw Samaya was Christmas of 2011, so about a year before this takes place, and that they had been together for Christmas. Everything had been sweet, everything had been wonderful, and that after Samaya had opened all of her presents, she went and like all cheerfully in her little, you know, like kids at Christmas in their little pajamas with their little hair, and she went and gave every single person there a hug and told them thank you. It just makes my heart ache, because she was just a little girl, you know? She was just a little kid. And people are fucking monster animals. So now we're going to fast forward to a year later, and it's December 27th, 2012, and police receive an anonymous tip that Samaya is missing, hasn't been seen for a long time, and that they were worried something really up had happened to her. And for a long while, who the anonymous tip was kept anonymous. But I did listen to a podcast episode from Suffer the Little Children, where the host of this podcast sat down and had an interview with one of the police officers on the case. Because if you read articles, everything says anonymous. But in this interview, he said who it was. And it turns out that the person who called the police was the boyfriend of Bianca's cousin, Rayshawn's sister. Don't know her name. Either way. It seems that the parties involved in what happened to Samaya were being pretty tight-lipped about what they did, obviously, and that they took like a vow of silence at first, but after a couple of days, Bianca's cousin Rayshawn, who, spoiler alert, was involved, couldn't take it. The guilt was getting to him, and he just needed to say something to somebody, so he told his sister and his sister's boyfriend what had happened. And the boyfriend, almost immediately upon learning this information, was like, what the fuck? And called the police and reported it. So due to this anonymous call, police were on the lookout for Ronald and Bianca. And I have to imagine that they searched the couple's home first, but though that is not where they ended up finding him. They ended up actually spotting My brain is off. They ended up spotting Ronald in his car, and they pulled him over. And in the car, he had his daughter that he had with Bianca. And it was noted that Samaya wasn't there, so they were like, hey, where's your daughter, Samaya? And he was like, oh, she's with her mother, Monica. But police were able to quickly figure out that this wasn't true, because when they contacted Monica, she's like, what the fuck? No, she's been in Ronald's care for almost an entire year. And plus, I believe at this point they had already talked to Rayshawn. So when police are having him tell them an obvious blatant lie, they're just kind of listening to him and like, interesting that you say that, considering we have other people who are saying the complete opposite of that. So from there, the police go to the apartment that Ronald and Bianca shared that was located at the 11,900 block of Lee Avenue in Adelanto, California, to question them and search the home. Now, initially, police questioned the two separately, and they both had very different stories about where Samaya was. She was either with a friend or with a family member. Definitely not here, but not to worry. She was so fucking safe. Like, nothing to look at over here. Everything is fine. But police didn't really believe them, and they pressed him a little farther, still separately at this point. And this is when Bianca tells police, okay, my cousin Rayshawn did everything. Like, we were fine. Samaya was fine. Everything was cool as a cucumber. We left her with Rayshawn while we went to dinner, and when we came back from dinner, she was just gone. And police didn't really believe that. And then they ended up questioning the two together. They brought them together and started questioning them together and talking about the inconsistencies in their stories. And that's when the real story started to be told. Now, it hasn't been completely disclosed what was said between police and Ronald and Bianca that day, but in response to whatever they learned, police headed out to the Mojave Desert near Baker, California. If you've never been to the Mojave Desert, you've probably seen pictures of Joshua trees. It's like what we're known for. I'm still there. It's what that area is known for. I never saw the appeal, but I also lived there. And Baker, California is a little dirt spot on the way to Las Vegas, for your reference. And Baker, if you've never been there, so off subject, there's a place there called the Mad Greek Cafe that just has the best food. And every time me and my husband, anytime we go to Vegas, we stop there. It's totally irrelevant to the story, but just so you know of the area, if you're ever driving to Vegas, when you go through Baker, the place with the giant thermometer, go to the Mad Greek Cafe. Anyway, so police went out to Baker and they started searching the desert. Now, how they would find the right patch of patch of desert. I have no idea, because if you've ever been there, it's literally all of Baker, all of the high desert is just dirt and Joshua trees as far as the eye can see. Like, everything looks pretty similar. But somehow they did find the right location. They found the right patch of land. And when they searched there, they found Samaya wrapped in a princess sleeping bag and buried in a shallow grave. A sheriff who was part of this investigation said, and I quote, "At the conclusion of the interviews, investigators were led to an area in the desert south of Baker, California. A small grave was located where the 4-year-old's remains were recovered." In response to this discovery, police not only arrested 21-year-old Ronald and 19-year-old Bianca, but they also arrested Bianca's cousin, 26-year-old Rayshawn. The DA on this case said, and I quote, "Torturing a child in San Bernardino County will be met with the most vigorous of prosecutions, and those responsible will be held accountable for their actions." One of the things that's very frustrating about this case is once it was, found that she had been murdered and everything came out, it was discovered that CPS had an open case file on Samaya since late 2012, since the month that she was murdered. And there were reports of both neglect and child abuse against Samaya. So CPS became involved in this case after members of the school, teachers, principals, people who were responsible for reporting, reported to CPS that Samaya had come to school with a black and swollen eye. And when they had asked Samaya, how she got the injury, she said that Bianca, her dad's girlfriend, had beat her with a belt, and that's what caused the injury to her eye. So the school officials waited, and when Ronald came to pick her up that day, they asked him, how did this happen? And he told them that Samaya was playing with her baby brother, and her baby brother had accidentally caused the injury to her eye. Which made no sense, because her baby brother lived with her mother, Monica, not with Ronald and Bianca and Samaya. So he couldn't have really caused that injury since he wasn't there. So a social worker did end up seeing Samaya, meeting with Samaya, and saw her injuries and her bruises, and took this information back to the supervisors and told them, this is what I saw, what is the game plan, what should we do? And for whatever reason, it was decided that Samaya should stay in that home. I don't know why that would be, but that was their decision. And that there would just be some follow-ups to make sure that she was okay. But the follow-up got delayed and kept getting delayed and kept getting delayed, because apparently the social worker who was assigned to Samaya's case had 100 cases at that time, and you can only do so much, you know what I mean? You can only see so many kids in a day. And by the time they made it back to Samaya to do another check and make sure she was still okay, she was already dead. On January 9th, 2013, Samaya's funeral took place. Her grave marker is covered in little hearts, and it says, quote, "Mommy's bundle of love, forever missed, loved, and never forgotten." So, Ronald Dean Greer Jr. and Bianca Annie Mae Stanch were booked on suspicion of murder and assault on a child. And Rayshawn Larice Stanch was booked for murder and a parole violation because during this time, Rayshawn was on parole. It was reported that, quote, "They did unlawfully, having care and custody of Samiah Christine Cornell Downing, a child under the age of 8 years, assault that child by means of force that to a reasonable person would be likely to produce bodily injury, resulting in the child's death." Rayshawn, I believe, was held without bail, and both Ronald and Bianca were held at a bail of $1.25 million. It came out that both Ronald and Rayshawn actually had criminal records prior to what happened to Samaya. Ronald had a prior criminal record for burglary, having stolen property, being in the possession of stolen property, and vandalizing property, and running from the police. And for this, he spent a couple months in jail and was given probation. Rayshawn had a prior criminal record for assault with a deadly weapon, but had just gotten a couple months in jail and probation for this. He had also been arrested and charged again for assault with a deadly weapon, and this time child abuse as well, and spent 3 years in jail. He was also ordered to take anger management classes and rehab, and a restraining order was filed against him. along with various other smaller crimes, and he was on probation at the time of Samaya's murder. So Ronald and Bianca were brought in to make their pleas, and when they were brought in, they were wearing green jumpsuits because they were in protective custody, probably because people don't like people who murder children. And they both pled not guilty. And I believe Rayshawn initially pled not guilty to his charges as well. So during the course of this trial, like they weren't okay, my brain is going too fast. You know how you get arrested and then you're supposed to have a trial, but there's always like things that happen, things that delay it, things that push it off. Well, this trial took a very long time to take place, and the trio ended up changing attorneys several times during this time. And when it finally came down to it, Rayshawn was severed. So basically what happened is Ronald and Bianca were going to be tried together, but a motion was filed to have Rayshawn severed so that he would be heard separately, because essentially Ronald and Bianca decided to just turn on Rayshawn and say that everything was him. Which is so fucked up. Like, that's your family, but I mean, I'm not expecting like great people, great morals and ethics out of these people. So, oh, it makes me crazy, bro. It makes me crazy. Kids' cases make me insane. So Rayshawn, who was, by the way, legally blind, not to say he couldn't see anything, but you know, legally blind just means that you see very poorly. And he had some mental impairments as well. He ended up agreeing to a plea bargain. And in this plea deal, he would plead guilty to the willful cruelty of a child, but in exchange, the murder, there's cat hair and everything, the murder charges would be dropped, and he was required to testify against both Ronald and Bianca at their hearings. And I actually don't know what the fate of Rayshawn was, because this all just happened. Like, though the murder happened in 2012, the hearing didn't start until 2020, okay? And Rayshawn was going to be testifying against Bianca and Ronald, and after that, his hearing and his sentencing was going to take place, but I have found nothing on whether or not his sentencing actually has taken place. I even did an inmate search and everything, and I found nothing on him. But I mean, think of how many delays there were just to get to this point, right? 2012, 2020. And we're still in the throes of COVID, and courts are closing again. I don't know if you know, but it doesn't matter. Courthouses are closing again, so it's likely that he has not yet been sentenced. Anyway, so as I said, this case was halted several times. Like, trying to get this trial started was a bitch and a half, and the prosecution would always object to all the defense's requests to continue, but unfortunately the continuances still kept happening because the defense kept requesting continuances to, you know, be ready for trial. They kept switching attorneys. There's lots of reasons that these things happen. Finally, it was set to start taking place, the trial that is, in March of 2020, but then it got halted again because COVID was like, I'm here, get used to it, because I'm not going anywhere. Who's still surprised that we're still here? We're still fucking here. So the courthouses were closed for a long time. There were lots of delays in trials, if you don't know, because like this is what I do at work. Other than this, which is hobby, really. It's not a money-making machine, let me tell you that. But my job, I'm a paralegal, doesn't matter. But courthouses were closed for a while. All hearings were continued over and over and over for a while. But finally, things started to kind of even out, and courthouses opened again. And when that did happen, the prosecution pushed to have this case made a priority and heard right away because of how many delays there had already been and how long this family had already waited for justice, since it had been 8-9 years at this point, and they were successful. The trial included 6 weeks of evidence, and the prosecution ended up calling over 20 witnesses in order to try to illustrate, what had happened to Samaya, how bad these people were to her, and, just trying to make their case as strong as possible. The witnesses talked about the way Samaya was treated in the house she was living in, and they also testified about just what a sweet and loving and wonderful girl Samaya was. During this time, the prosecutor also talked about how Samaya's murder had affected the community, saying, and I quote, When Samaya was murdered, our community was also greatly affected by the actions of her killers. From Samaya's extended family, friends, and teachers, to the law enforcement officers investigating this crime, to everyone in the district attorney's office that had a part in this case, we will always hold Samaya in our memory and in our hearts. So now let's talk about the trial that finally eventually did take place. Let's talk about what came out at trial, what Rayshawn testified happened to Samaya, and this is going to be the point where things get a little more rough. On July 28, 2020, the trial of Bianca and Ronald began, and Rayshawn testified at this trial. And he testified to the fact that Samaya was relentlessly beaten and tortured at the hands of his cousin, Bianca Stanch, and that Ronald Greer, her father, Samaya's father, did nothing to stop it. He also testified that both Ronald and Bianca would use withholding food and water from Samaya, who was 4 years old, as a punishment to her. And he said that on either the night that she died or the night before she died, I believe it was probably the night before, but it doesn't matter. It does. That Bianca had made dinner, and that Samaya said that she didn't like whatever they were having. So in response, Bianca's like, well then, you don't get to fucking eat. You can starve then. And that from that point on till the point that she did die, Rayshawn never saw her eat or drink again, that they didn't allow her to eat or drink again. And at this time, Rayshawn was living in the apartment with Ronald and Bianca, so he would have seen this. He even reported that at one point, Samaya had been so thirsty that she drank whatever she could find that was present at the time, and that what she ended up drinking was cleaning solution because this little baby was so thirsty. Now this, I do not believe happened the night before she was murdered, and they have said that drinking the cleaning solution did not affect her in that it was responsible at all for her murder. It had nothing to do with how she died. This is just to illustrate the abuse that she suffered prior to dying. Bianca Stanch hated Samaya. Now why? It hasn't really come out, but I mean, I think we can take some guesses. Maybe it's because Samaya reminded her that her boyfriend, her baby daddy as she called him, had a girlfriend, had been intimate with somebody prior to her, or maybe she was pissed off taking care of somebody's kid that wasn't hers, and maybe she hated Monica. It's really hard to say. But because of this, she fucking tortured this 4-year-old child until she was dead, and her dad did nothing to stop it. And I believe he was more involved than he says for sure, because there were also reports that both Bianca and Ronald would duct tape Samaya's hands together and duct tape her wrists together and then lock her in her room so that she couldn't move. They had also installed a deadbolt on the outside of her door, so that in the hallway, so that they could put her in and lock her in and just leave her in there as long as they wanted, without food, without water. Just locking this little girl in a prison. And they would just keep Samaya in there as long as they wanted, whenever they wanted to. Evidence in trial showed that the day that Bianca was killed, she was tortured pretty badly. She was forced to stand in a corner for 8 straight hours without moving, without going to the bathroom, without eating anything. And after that, Bianca beat her all over her body with cords and belts. And then at some point, this evil woman took a pot of boiling water and poured it onto Samaya's back and shoulders. So she had burns all over her back, her shoulders, and her chest. This was a 4-year-old child. Prosecutors said of this night, and I quote, "On the evening of her death, Samaya was acting lethargic and sleepy. She was locked inside a bedroom within the apartment and was left with Stanch's cousin, Rayshawn Stanch, while Stanch and Greer went to dinner." So literally, after making her stand in a corner for 8 hours, beating her all over her body with belts and cords, and then pouring boiling hot water on a 4-year-old child's back and shoulders and chest, water that was hot enough to rip the skin. They then locked her in her bedroom. They deadbolted her in her bedroom, and left to go out and have dinner while Rayshawn stayed in the apartment. That's so fucking evil. Like, I can't even, like, wrap my brain around how a person could do something like that. And they believe this was the day that she died, and that they believe that this was on December 15th, 2012. So, just 2 months before her 5th birthday. Once Ronald and Bianca returned home from their dinner that evening, they found that Samaya was dead in her bedroom. So the three of them then had to figure out what they were going to do about this. And what they landed on was that they were going to just get rid of her body. So they took her, they wrapped her up in this princess sleeping bag and loaded her in the car, and then drove out to that place in the desert in Baker, California, about an hour and a half from her home, and they buried her in a shallow grave. So, police thought for sure that Samaya had to have died because of her injuries, because to just look at her once they had found her, it was clear that she had been so badly brutalized that of course this would kill a 4-year-old child. But when an autopsy was done, it was found that her cause of death was dehydration, which meant that she could have lived through all of these injuries we've talked about if they had just given her some water. If they had just given her some food and water, as crazy as it sounds, she could have lived through what they did to her. To think about the fact that she could have lived through all of that, but was so just neglected that it was a lack of water, just breaks my heart. And when they found her, she was also incredibly malnourished. Just 6 months prior, she had been tested and she was in like the 5th percentile of her weight class, so, which means that prior to being with Ronald and Bianca, she was taken care of. But just 6 months later, she was in the 50th percentile. So she went from the 5th percentile to the 50th percentile. So she just quickly, in just 6 months, had just withered away. At trial, Ronald testified, which I guess was something that his attorney didn't really want him to do, but he did it anyway. And he testified that during the time that all of this was happening to Samaya, he had developed a pretty serious drug problem. Coke, weed, alcohol, all that. And because of that, though he was there, technically, he wasn't really there when all of this was happening. He said that he never noticed anything bad happening to Samaya because of his drug use and just being out of it. But it came out that, like, when he was very first arrested, they took his blood, like they had the foresight to take his blood, and it was tested, and it was found that this wasn't true. He didn't have evidence of having a serious substance abuse problem that would have caused him to, like, not notice his child was being abused. And in addition to that, he testified that when it came to the water deprivation, that he never withheld water from her. That, like, at nighttime, at a certain time of night, they would stop giving her water so she wouldn't wet the bed, but that he didn't restrict her day and night. He also testified at trial that he never saw any of Samaya's injuries. Ever. None of these were visible to him. Even as he wrapped her dead body in her princess sleeping bag, he didn't notice any of these injuries. He did not know that they even existed until the photos were shown of her body at trial. The DA's office said of his testimony, and I quote, "Several inconsistencies emerged during cross-examination on the events of 2012 and what Greer knew about how Samaya was being treated." I do not believe, even a fucking little bit, that Ronald did not see the injuries to his child. There was no part of Samaya's body that was not injured when they found her. She had bruises and wounds and burns on her body. She had defensive wounds on her little hands. She had 10 to 20 U-shaped bruises on her body that are common for beatings with a cord, along with plenty of belt injuries all over her body from her ankles to the top of her head. And though some of these injuries were older, many of them were new, received just hours before her death. She also had these marks on her face, along with a blunt force injury to her forehead that split her skin, but did not crack her skull. Plus the injuries on her back and her shoulders and her chest from the boiling water, because the water was hot enough that it ripped this child's skin. So I just have a little trouble believing that this guy was completely oblivious to his 4-year-old daughter suffering. Maybe that's just me. Let me know what you think. Do you think it's possible that he just missed all of this somehow? Or do you think he just let it happen? Or alternatively, that he was involved? Samaya's grandma, Christina, not to be confused with Christine, which is who she was named for, who had passed away, but Christina said of what happened to Samaya, and I quote, "The sweetest, most kindest, most lovable little girl in the world. In the manner she was murdered and taken away. It's like, who does that to a child? She was murdered and tortured and so brutal, and it sits in the back of your mind, in your head, especially when you've seen it all and you've heard everything. And you're like, she was just 4 years old. How can somebody stand that much pain and torture?" In the end, a jury found Ronald Greer and Bianca Stanch guilty of murder, torture, and willfully causing or permitting a child to suffer with a special allegation of causing death. They were found guilty of this in October of 2020, and their sentencing hearing was set for March of 2021. On Friday, March 12th, 2021, so nearly 10 years after Samaya's murder, Bianca Annie Mae Stanch and Ronald Dean Greer Jr. were sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. The deputy district attorney said, and I quote, "Unfortunately, because of the actions of her father and his girlfriend, Samaya wasn't here to tell her own story to the jurors. Thankfully, the evidence at trial told the tragic story for her. Samaya was betrayed by the people closest to her, and they have now been held accountable for that betrayal." The San Bernardino County Prosecutor's Office also urged those who heard about Samaya's case, knew of Samaya's case, or just hearing about it for the first time, to be vigilant and to keep their eyes open because they could potentially save a child's life, because many people knew or suspected that something was going on with Samaya and that something was happening to her, but nobody did anything to stop it. Nobody did anything to help her, and nobody noticed the warning signs, like the marks on her being isolated from her family, a deadbolt on the outside of her door. Nobody saw these things and put two and two together, or if they did, they didn't do anything about it. So officials said, kind of urging the parents and the guardians, not even the people who see these things happening, but the people who are experiencing the frustrations and the difficulties of being a parent or a guardian or somebody, anybody who's taking care of children. And I quote, "If you are a parent or a guardian of a child and are experiencing frustration, anger, or helplessness, please reach out for help. There are plenty of resources available which will help you while keeping your child safe from verbal, psychological, and physical abuse." Samaya's grandfather, Christopher, who he nicknamed Samaya Little Peanut, and she called him Papa, fucking kill me. He's been having a lot of trouble, at least he was, I'm sure he still is, with losing Samaya. Not only losing her, but losing her in the way that he did, and in having to have the realization that her own father had something to do with what happened to her. Like, to know that a 4-year-old is gone is already so hard, and then just to know how and what she went through, I don't know how anybody deals with it. I don't know. It seems impossible. And he has said, and I quote, "If I thought any of this would have happened, if I thought she was in any danger, she would have been with me. She was just like any other little girl visiting her father." He continued by saying, quote, "I still don't understand. There's nothing in the world a baby could do to deserve even a part of this." This little girl just had so many people who cared about her, man, and it's just that her fucking dickhead dad and his piece of shit girlfriend were not among those people. And it's just crazy to think about the fact that they had another child in that house, another daughter who was seemingly cared for, while Samaya went through all she went through. And it makes me fucking insane. Samaya's Aunt Lori said of her, and I quote, "We want her to be remembered, and for people to remember that she was loved and she was taken good care of by our family, that she wasn't abandoned with these people." She also said of Samaya and how just like what a delight she was to be around and what a wonderful person she was. And I quote, "I'll always remember she always had a smile on her face. She was kind of shy and bashful when she meets people for the first time, but she was always smiling, happy, and really playful." And that's who the world lost that day, for absolutely no reason at all. So that, my friends, is the story of the horrific and tragic murder of 4-year-old Samiah Downing. Isn't that just one of the most upsetting things that you've ever heard? This was a very difficult case to look into, and it was also a very difficult case to research because there really isn't a lot of information on Samaya out there, which is just so frustrating. And it's also frustrating because I feel like this is the type of case that we should have all heard about and been outraged by because it's fucking insane. But yet I did not even hear of her or knew that she had existed until this year, 2022. When I'm filming this right now, it's January. You're, I believe, watching this at the end of February. And I just learned about her case, even though it literally happened 10 years ago now. And it makes me so frustrated to hear that it took that long for her family to get justice. I mean, 10 years. 10, almost 10 years from the time she was killed to the time they were sentenced. Makes me so fucking mad. And it makes me wonder about the San Bernardino County fucking court system, to be quite honest with you. I know this happens in other places as well, but in San Bernardino County, that's actually the county that my friends were murdered in. And it also took their families, my friends' families, 10 years, 10 or more, to get the sentencing and to get the justice. So it really makes me wonder about San Bernardino County. I don't know what's going on out there, but it's just like unacceptable, man. It's crazy to think that you have to wait 10 years for something like that, especially when they're caught right away and it's so clear cut what happened. It makes me fucking crazy. It's just so unfair to leave these families in limbo for so long because it doesn't give them a chance to really have any real closure and start to heal because it's still ongoing forever. And to speak to that, even though these fucking assholes were just sentenced, Ronald has already fucking tried to appeal. I haven't seen anything of its success, but still, this family suffers and will continue to suffer because of things like this. And I hope this asshole, none of these two get out of jail for what they've done because they're absolute monsters. Especially when speaking to Ronald, because as a parent, as a human being, it is your duty, it is your fucking job, and it should be just an inherent drive that you have within yourself to protect your children. But this guy didn't have that and did quite the opposite. And to think about what happened to her and that he just sat by and allowed it, the person that's supposed to be supposed to die for you, you know what I mean? Like, this is supposed to be the person who would do literally anything for you, and he did nothing. To let her suffer as horribly as she did for as long as she did is unexcusable and unacceptable. And he might as well have poured that boiling water on her himself, in my mind, because really, I hardly see a difference. Just imagine for a moment what life was like for Samaya. To be beaten and tortured and to look around and see no one in her corner, no one there to look to and to run to and to feel comfort in. Nobody who made her feel safe. To look around and see everyone else getting fed, getting water, to look at her little sister and see her being loved and cared for, and then to have all of that happening to her. How scared and hurt emotionally and physically and just confused this little girl must have been at what was happening to her. It makes me absolutely fucking crazy. And just so fucking sad. That's the saddest thing. That, yeah, it fucks up my brain. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope that you found it interesting and informative, and that it gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case, because this is a case that's definitely worth remembering and worth talking about. And of course, I want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Samaya with me today. She was a beautiful little girl with her entire life ahead of her, who did nothing, did and could not have done anything to deserve what happened to her. And her life was cut short by these two pieces of actual shit. And I gotta be honest, I hope they die in jail. Is that too harsh? Maybe it is, but I don't really give a fuck. I don't. Please let me know of any cases you would like to see me cover down below, because as you know, I have a long list of cases, but anytime you leave a suggestion, I try to look into it so that I can cover it, because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell, because I put out a new video every week and I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. And if you'd like to hang out more consistently, you can follow me on all my social media. Everything's linked down below. I've got an Instagram, I got a Twitter, I got a Facebook page, and I got a Facebook group. You can also find a list down there of all the makeup I use, my earrings, my nail polish, which is fucking chipped today. Like, I'm getting pregnant, you know? Like, I'm pre-filming, I'm feeling large, and I didn't paint my nails, and I'm sorry. But if you wanted to know what this chipped glitter is, it's linked down below, along with a link to my merch store if you wanted merch. This is one of my shirts. I love it. My husband designs all my merch. The link's down there in case you want to see that as well. Just up to you. It's up to you, man. Whatever you want, it's down there. And with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.